Greetings, I'm Kathy Green with Christian News and Interviews. And I'm going to quickly update you on the Othal Ozone Wallace case. As you, I'm sure, have already guessed, he has been recommended for the death penalty. Death penalty sought for man charged in Florida officer's killing. Texas and Florida are two states where you don't want to kill anyone because they do go straight for the death penalty. Those two states in particular. Prosecutors plan to seek the death penalty for a man accused of murdering a Florida police officer. I'm going to drop down. Rayner, that's the officer, 26 years old, had been in the hospital since he was shot in the head on June the 23rd while questioning a man in a Central Florida apartment complex parking lot. So he did pass away. And Ozone Wallace was subsequently captured, and as predicted, the state of Florida is seeking the death penalty against him. When I look at the court case on October the 20th, 2021, there was a supplemental witness list. When I looked at it, there was nothing really complete. So the witness list in terms of the names are not there yet. There's an order granting continuance. So not a whole lot has happened yet, but what I do want you to see is what happened on August the 30th, 2021. An intent to seek the death penalty and the list of the aggravating factors. Let's see if this will open up. It may or may not open. Let's see, image processing returned empty, so it probably won't open. But the long and the short of it is, the state of Florida has made it very clear that they are seeking the death penalty. It will probably eventually open, but I'm not going to sit here and wait. What I am going to do is continue talking to you. Yeah, I mean, this is like the indictment. Let's see if the indictment will open. It may just be a situation where nothing's going to open tonight. Let's see if the indictment is opened. Okay, so my computer's slow. I don't know if it's my computer or if it's this site, but nothing's really opening, and I'm not going to waste your time. What I am going to do, however, is, this is his list of, he does have a pretty long record, but his record, it consists of a lot of silly stuff like driving without a license. You know, it looks like he has a long record, but when you break it down, which I did in a different video, it's just a bunch of driving without a license pretty much. But this is what I wanted to say. I don't know this man. I know he's in a lot of trouble. The state of Florida is seeking the death penalty. I'm going to predict that he's going to be found guilty. Assuming that he's found guilty, his attorneys need to have some way of keeping him out of the electric chair. There are two things I wanted to bring to your attention. As I was doing a little bit of research on this case, Ozone was not completely raised by his mother, apparently, because for quite a while he lived in a group home situation owned by a church. And that's where he stayed. And that was the address he used. I don't know how many years he was there, but I know that he lived in a group home for a while. So I would be curious to know what happened in his life that led him to live separate from his mother. What happened in his life that led him to live in a group home situation? And if you go to YouTube and you see that video of his mother talking, without me going into any detail, I'll just say this. If you ever see his mother, you'll get an idea of why there's no reason to be surprised that he wasn't living. I'll leave it at that. But in order to, one way to stay out of the electric chair is to prove that you have an intellectual disability, if in fact you have one. And I don't know Ozone, I don't know anything about him, but if I were his attorney, I would have his IQ tested to see what's going on there, because if you have an IQ of 70 or below, you do not qualify for the death penalty. So let me just read just a little bit of this. On June the 20th, 2002, the United States Supreme Court ruled that executing people with intellectual disabilities violated the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. And I'm going to drop down between 1989 and 2002, 16 states outlawed executing intellectually disabled people, bringing the total to 18 of the 38 states that have a death penalty. The court also looked to public opinion polls that have consistently shown support for banning executions of people with intellectual disabilities. And a person must have a sub-average intellectual functioning. Intelligence quotient, which is IQ, tests are one means of determining sub-average functioning, but it is important not to confuse IQ with intellectual ability. A common standard is an IQ of 70 or below, but numbers alone do not always determine intellectual disability. Second, a person must have difficulty coping in the everyday world. Well, again, Ozone had been living in a group home. Something obviously happened that caused him to be separated from his mother. I would be curious as to what his high school was like, what his middle school was like, what his elementary school education was like. All of this adds up. A person must have difficulty coping in the everyday world. People with intellectual disabilities, particularly in less severe forms, are often able to have autonomous members of society, holding jobs and living without assistance. However, they have a greater difficulty than the average person dealing with stressful situations. Their intellectual development and reasoning are limited, as is their ability to predict cause and effect. So you shoot somebody, that's the cause. The effect is the person may die and you may end up on the death penalty. Cause and effect. So his attorneys, I'm sure, will consider having his IQ tested to see what we're working with here. If not, they need to be fired. People with intellectual disabilities, and I'm not saying this man has one, but I'm saying it's worth looking at to keep him at least off the death penalty. But people with intellectual disabilities are very vulnerable. They are vulnerable to end up in a gang. They are vulnerable to be the fall guy for criminals. They are vulnerable to end up in a cult. They are vulnerable to end up on the receiving end of the death penalty. They're vulnerable to end up in groups like INFAC, or the Not Fooling Around Coalition. which he was a part of, by the way, that militia group of people walking around with these threatening guns as though they could possibly win a fight against police officers. They're vulnerable. So if his attorneys or public defenders are watching, if you haven't done so already, have this man's IQ tested. There's a possibility that he's high functioning intellectually disabled. And if so, you may not be able to keep him out of jail, but at least you can save his life. Stay tuned. I'm going to follow this case.